Hello, everyone, and here we are again for big idea number 10 in the 2025 edition of the Education Revolution. It has been wonderful hearing back from listeners about how some of these ideas have been resonating and how many of you have been also considering and struggling with how to practically action some of this work in your educational context, and that you're finding it inspiring in that way. So that's wonderful. We are all about practical implementation here. So big idea number 10, higher education needs higher standards. Now, I have naturally, as a consultant and in my work as director of academic innovation at York University, spent a lot of time in the last 10 years working in higher education contexts, universities and colleges alike. And we get a lot of talk about how higher education is not meeting expectations. We hear it from employers, you hear it from students. What is university even for anymore? Do I even need this piece of paper? What's the value proposition of higher education? We're going to break it down into 3 specific ideas today. One is we need to redefine rigor. We talk a lot about this word in academic circles, that we need to be rigorous in our teaching and learning in higher education. We're going to redefine that term. Then we need to look at competencies over completion. I've already been talking a lot about skills-based indicators. We'll dive back into that. And lastly, we need to look at educators, look at capacity building and supporting educators, not just experts. Again, something that you've heard me talk about, but we're gonna revisit it here in the higher education context. Okay, so rigor. What does it mean in terms of learning well and teaching at a certain kind of rigorous standard? Well, higher education, this word often comes with research, right? And people are hired, a lot of subject matter experts in higher education contexts are hired as researchers, subject matter experts that also do research, and then they teach on the side more often than not. There are new contract positions and definitions of educator that are like the teaching stream, things that are happening that are more teacher focused as opposed to the research piece. But rigor in research is it valid? Is it replicable piece, right? But there is often this very agnostic, cold connotation when it comes to the scientific method that we employ in research often, right? In teaching and learning, it is a human process. It's innately subjective, nuanced, human-focused, affective. How do we learn? How do we remember? Through emotional tags, right? So rigor, we need to redefine what we mean by a rigorous learning environment, not as being the most standardized of tests, a certain level of test scores. It's about our students able to think deeply. Can they ask better questions? Can they make interdisciplinary connections between what you're teaching them in an Engineering 101 course and Psychology 204? Can they understand the application in the real world context associated with a philosophy degree or a language arts or the visual arts world? Depth versus density. This idea of rigor as volume of work. I feel like we talked about this as well, that this is a plague in many educational environments, this idea of breadth. It's not that breadth over depth or depth over breadth. It's not one or the other, but this idea of an elementary school teacher, if you ever look at what an elementary school teacher in grade 3 is supposed to teach, like the curriculum documents that dictate what a grade 3 teacher is supposed to teach their class, it is ludicrous, the breadth that they are supposed to cover. And it is no wonder that they're not able to dive and plumb the depths into how their learners are engaging with information, because they have to move on to the next thing. Same thing in higher education. There seems to be this understanding that there's a syllabi, it covers a number of weeks, it covers the chapters in a textbook or a timeline, a series of influential artists that need to be covered. This breadth and density often causes educators to sacrifice depth, where we are asking questions, thinking critically, talking about one specific concept. So let's just, E equals MC squared, energy, mass. I should have picked something that wasn't science, but you have an equation, and instead of teaching them just the equation, how to apply the equation, we talk about the context and situations, the origins of that equation, the consequences of its inception, how different characters and critiques arose because after it came out, how did Einstein deal with the real life consequences of originating that equation? What does it mean to us now? How can we learn from more than just the equation itself? Depth. This idea of intellectual engagement. So giving learners time to consider and engage and question the material that's coming at them, as opposed to, I've covered this unit, I've given them a quiz on this unit, they had an assignment, a reflection question on this unit, if you even integrated reflective practice, now I'm moving on to the next unit. Also looking at connections in this rigor, right? Rigorously scaffolding information and making it more clear to the learners in your course how units map conceptually onto one another, using big ideas, using thematic organization in a concept map. Raising the thinking bar, right? Not just test scores. Rethinking rigor. This very naturally connects to this idea of competency over completion. So if we're thinking depth versus breadth, depth, an emphasis on depth in a breadth of information, then we want to naturally be thinking of skills, right? Like this idea of clicking through and checking all the boxes, and I've completed that quiz and I've completed that reading and, current event response. We're asking learners from a pedagogical standpoint, but also from an assessment standpoint, to just move their way through these benchmarks, as opposed to integrating opportunities for them to demonstrate deeper knowledge and skill asset acquisition. So we need to align our coursework with this real world readiness, as opposed to just this ticking boxes, and stop asking if students are passing our courses and shift the narrative to, are the learners in my course prepared to use this information in real world context, to adapt and think on their feet to solve problems in these diverse places and spaces, dealing with different circumstances where some of these ideas might be challenged, and how do they effectively adapt their thinking, knowing that they are more agile as thinkers because of this course, not just as subject matter experts coming out and having learned a breadth of information. Competencies over completion, which is a natural consequence. We're going to naturally build learning experiences that are more competency oriented, which, if you'll remember, I use a very basic definition of competency-based learning, which is just knowledge and skill assets in combination. So what, and then applications of that what in practice, and shifting our assessments to be able to readily assess for depth and different kinds of rigor that are more skills-based. So performative, process-oriented, measuring what matters, right? Valuing what's valuable. Go check that episode out if you missed it. And lastly, what I'm trying to do with these podcasts and these conversations that I've had over the years in this forum and in the work that I do as a consultant and as an employee for different higher education institutions is to equip subject matter experts with more educational knowledge and skill assets, right? Competencies that make them educators and help push them past what they used to think was their value in the higher education context, right? I've mentioned it before, this identity crisis. I'm with you. I feel you. And this work is hard, right? Rethinking rigor, looking at more competency-based measures versus completion-based measures, right? This is hard stuff to do. So we need to be supporting people, trying to talk about these ideas, giving people practical ways of moving forward and actualizing some of this work, and professional development in higher education is severely lacking. I got my eyes on once an outline or a synthesis of professional development centers in Canada, their staffing, their resource allotment, the different kinds of positions that were held in these teaching and learnings or centers for educational excellence or whatever they're referred to in your institution. If you work in the higher education sector, we are poorly underfunded, under-resourced, understaffed, not only in human capacities and financial capacities, but also in the knowledge and skills required to move us forward. So yes, we do need to talk about what is experiential learning, but we need to talk about technology-enhanced experiential learning. We need to talk about efficient, effective ways of embodying experiential learning. We need to talk about scaffolding learning in online learning management systems. Like, how do we maximize our LMS? We need more integration between our teaching and learning professional development staff and our IT departments. The reality of the world that we're living in is that the majority of us are teaching, now all of us are teaching in technology enhanced environments, even if all you're doing is using your LMS instance as an information repository or somewhere that your syllabus is posted. You are getting students to submit things online. Like, there is already technology in your learning design. And if we want to rethink rigor and work on more competency-based measures, we need to equip educators with the kind of professional development opportunities that we can with whatever resources we have, because we don't have enough. But how can we rethink one PD course where we're not just teaching experiential education, for example, but we're teaching how to leverage AI, how to work with your LMS in the creation of a sustainable experiential education model for your course. The same way we want to rethink our content areas and think about interdisciplinarity, we need to think about our PD programs for educators in higher education through this interdisciplinary lens. It is about your disciplinary content, it is about technology, and it is about those three pillars of teaching and learning, curriculum, pedagogy, and assessment, and what we're doing in the forefront of cutting edge development in those three areas. But it is all those things together. And we can address all of those in one 1 hour online workshop, in one 3 hour face-to-face session, in one teaching and learning conference. We can highlight these things so that we can highlight to learners in high school, to adults seeking reskilling and upskilling opportunities, that we are valuable, that a higher education produces thinkers for the future, produces adaptable, resilient innovators that will help us struggle some of the biggest problems, tackle some of the biggest problems that our species has ever faced. I truly believe, not only because I have like 3 of them and I work in these areas, I truly believe that higher education systems can remain as long as we revolutionize the way we approach subject matter expertise and education within that system. If we can rethink rigor, focus on competencies, and develop forward, future-ready professional development programs, the system can stay and we revolutionize within it. Because it matters and it's useful. And what we can do after high school with the brain now, with the higher level functioning areas of our brain fully formed, what we can do with abstract reasoning and getting young adults and adult learners ready to be well-informed, contributing citizens, we've never needed it more. It is not that we have lost the value proposition, is that we're not articulating it and the system is not supporting the new value proposition. So we need to live up to what our potential is in higher education. Let's give ourselves higher standards. The Education Revolution podcast is produced in-house by community members, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Sangera. Thank you for listening to this week's episode, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and head over to my website to opt in for my newsletter for more ways to connect with some of these big ideas.